The gray treasure in your fireplace is a rediscovery of America's first fertilizer. Today, we are starting with something so ordinary and overlooked that most people sweep it into the trash without a second glance. Yet your grandparents guarded it like gold. I am talking about the soft gray dust beneath your fireplace grate, wood ash. For more than 100 years, families across early America did not treat ash as waste, they treated it as wealth. They used it to fertilize their crops, trade with neighbors, and even pay their taxes. Long before chemical fertilizers came in colorful bags, this simple mineral lifted harvests and built the backbone of the young nation. Strangely, we still have it today, but we throw it away. Then we drive to the store and pay for the same potassium and calcium that once sat quietly in every hearth. This is about rediscovering that gray mineral that can triple fruit size when your soil needs it, strengthen your plants naturally, and save real money at a time when fertilizer prices keep rising. This isn't folklore. You will hear real research, real numbers, and practical, gentle techniques that fit perfectly into a gardener's routine. If you are ready to see your fireplace in a whole new light and turn yesterday's ashes into tomorrow's harvest, let's look at when ashes were as good as cash. Imagine a winter morning in New England in the late 1700s. Snow sits heavy on the ground, the world is hushed and white, and a thin ribbon of smoke curls from a stone chimney where a family gathers close for warmth by the hearth. Boots dry, hands warm, and that familiar bed of gray ash lies quietly beneath the fire. To us, it looks like waste. To them, it was wealth. Early American families didn't sweep their ashes away. They saved them like currency. Every bucket mattered. When spring arrived, they poured water over the ash in great iron kettles, stirred the slurry until their arms burned, and boiled it down again and again. When the water finally evaporated, a crusty gray mineral remained: potash. In that young nation, potash was as good as cash. The word itself reflects its origins. Pot ash. Ash boiled in a pot. Even the element potassium, the K in modern fertilizer, takes its name from this simple frontier process. Long before garden centers existed, the most valuable mineral for fruiting and flowering was created right at home, born from last winter's firewood. After the American Revolution, potash became more than a farm supply. It became the economic backbone of many frontier towns in states like Vermont and Maine. Tax collectors accepted barrels of potash the way we accept checks today. One barrel could fetch $20 to $30, enough to buy a cow or pay a year's rent on a rough-hewn cabin tucked into the forest. Old town ledgers list potash right alongside furs, corn, and timber. It was that important. For nearly a century, potash kettles glowed across the countryside from New England to Ohio. Smoke rising from ash work signaled livelihood, industry, and human grit. Soap makers needed potash, glass makers relied on it, and farmers with thin soils depended on it to keep their crops from failing. Ash was something you could scoop out of your own hearth and trade for nearly anything your family needed. Then came a moment that most Americans have forgotten, yet it speaks volumes. On July 31st, 1790, the United States issued patent number 1, not for a machine, not for a weapon, and not for the cotton gin. The very first patent in American history went to Samuel Hopkins, a Quaker inventor, for improving the way potash and pearl ash were made. His design, a kind of specialized kiln, helped extract more minerals from every batch of ash, turning simple fireplace waste into a consistent, high-value product. That patent was personally signed by George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Edmund Randolph. 3 founding leaders placed their names on a method for transforming wood ash into fertilizer and industrial minerals. That alone tells us just how essential this gray material was to early American life. For decades afterward, American potash ranked among the best in the world. Barrels rolled down wagon trails, floated along riverboats, and moved from quiet forest clearings into bustling ports and growing cities. Ash helped build industries, strengthen farms, and support families across a nation still finding its footing. As we stand here today, looking at that same gray dust in our fireplaces, it becomes clear that what so many of us throw away without a thought once helped build a country one shovelful at a time. No story about forgotten wisdom is complete without the moment industry steps in and declares it can do the job faster, cheaper, and on a scale no homestead kettle could ever match. With potash, that moment arrived abruptly, far from American soil. In 1861, miners deep beneath the fields of Stassfurt, Germany, broke into vast underground beds of potassium salts, remnants of ancient oceans that had evaporated millions of years earlier. These deposits weren't scattered or weak. They were thick, nearly pure, and astonishingly easy to process. What early Americans had worked tirelessly to boil from buckets of ash, the earth offered here in mountains. German chemists refined this raw ore into a clean, concentrated fertilizer, potash that could be produced in bulk, bagged neatly, and shipped across continents by rail and steamship. It was predictable, it was abundant, and most importantly, it was cheap. Within a single decade, ship after ship arrived along the east coast of the United States carrying this new industrial potash. As those ships unloaded, the quiet economic foundation built on American wood ash began to crumble. By the 1880s, the collapse was undeniable. The price of American potash, once worth $50 a ton, fell so low it struggled to fetch 15. Trade journals of the era wrote almost mournfully about the sight of ash kettles being abandoned in backyards, calling it the time when the old works fell silent. And who could blame those families? Collecting wood ash is dirty work. Leaching it, boiling it, and tending the kettles for hours demanded time, labor, and firewood. When cheap bags of imported potash began arriving by train, promising the same minerals without the backbreaking steps, the math simply shifted. The gray dust that once bought livestock and paid taxes suddenly felt like a relic of a harder time. Most families swept it out the door without a second thought. By the early 1900s, the potash economy that had sustained rural America for nearly a century had faded almost entirely. Industrial fertilizers took center stage, and wood ash quietly sank back into the role of humble fireplace waste. Yet here we are today, more than 100 years later, living in a country that imports 85 to 90% of its potash. Most of it comes from the massive mines of Saskatchewan, with the rest shipped from overseas. Ancient seabeds are blasted apart, ore is crushed and refined, and then carried thousands of miles by train, truck, and cargo ship before it ever reaches a garden center shelf. Meanwhile, millions of American households still heat with wood. They still produce ash rich in potassium, calcium, and trace minerals, nearly identical to what sits inside those expensive fertilizer bags. And almost all of it goes straight into the trash. We didn't stop needing potassium. Our soils didn't stop needing calcium. Our fruit, vegetables, and flowers didn't suddenly change what they crave. What changed was that we forgot the value of the source sitting right beneath our noses. When industry marched forward, the wisdom quietly slipped backward. And yet the truth remains. The mineral that once built a nation is still in our fireplaces today, waiting to be remembered. Now that we have walked through the history, let's take a gentle step into the science. Nothing complicated or intimidating, just the kind of chemistry every gardener can appreciate. The secret behind this gray mineral isn't magic. It is simply the concentrated memory of the soil that fed the tree. When a log burns in your fireplace, most of what disappears goes up the chimney as carbon dioxide. Nitrogen and sulfur drift away as gases too. But the minerals, the real nutritional backbone of the tree, do not burn. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and dozens of tiny micronutrients remain behind, locked in that soft gray ash. Fire doesn't destroy them, it distills them. That is why a single shovelful of clean hardwood ash carries more concentrated plant nutrition than almost anything you can buy in a store. If you were to examine typical hardwood ash, you would find something remarkable. About 5 to 7% of its weight is potassium, the very nutrient responsible for fruit size, flavor, and plant resilience. Then you would see that 20 to 25% is calcium, the mineral that prevents blossom and rot and strengthens cell walls. Magnesium makes up another slice, often 1 to 4%, helping your plants turn sunlight into energy. A small bit of phosphorus appears too, just 1% or 2, along with a constellation of micronutrients like manganese, zinc, copper, boron, and iron, all essential in tiny but mighty amounts. If wood ash were forced to wear a modern fertilizer label, it would look something like 013 or 0210. That first number, the nitrogen, sits at 0, and that is important to remember. Ash doesn't supply nitrogen at all, so it will never replace compost, manure, or other nitrogen-rich amendments. But when it comes to the K, the potassium that turns leaves into fruit, ash performs the same job as store-bought fertilizers, just with a softer, more natural touch. At this point, many gardeners wonder whether hardwood or softwood ash makes a difference. The answer is yes, but it's not as dramatic as some fear. Studies from forestry and university extension programs show that hardwoods like oak, maple, and hickory produce more ash per quart of wood, and that ash tends to be richer in calcium and potassium. In one comparison, the same volume of oak produced more than 3 times as much ash and far more minerals than Douglas fir. But that doesn't mean softwood ash is useless. Far from it. If you heat your home with pine, spruce, or fir, you can still use the ash. You simply apply it more gently and with a bit more awareness. Another beautiful secret about ash is its role as a fast-acting natural lime. Up to a quarter of every scoop you collect is calcium carbonate and calcium oxide, nearly identical to what you would buy as garden lime. That means ash raises soil pH quickly, making acidic soil more hospitable to most vegetables. Research from Wisconsin to New Brunswick to Scandinavia shows that wood ash often delivers 25 to 59% of the neutralizing power of pure calcium carbonate, but it works faster in the soil. This makes ash a gift if your soil leans acidic, below 6 on the pH scale, or if you grow crops like tomatoes, cabbage, broccoli, beans, or most fruit trees. They all thrive when their soil is closer to neutral. But that same liming effect becomes a problem if your soil is already neutral or alkaline. And if you grow acid-loving plants like blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, or camellias. Even a small amount of ash can push the soil pH beyond what they can tolerate. That is why a simple pH test, something you can do in minutes, is the gardener's best safeguard. With that one step, you will know whether your ash is the perfect gentle amendment your soil has been waiting for, or whether it is a tool to be used sparingly or not at all in certain corners of your garden. Understanding what is in that gray dust is the real turning point. It is where old wisdom meets modern science, and it is where many gardeners discover that what they have been throwing away is actually one of the richest, most balanced mineral supplements nature can offer. Every gardener has heard the letters NPK, yet surprisingly few ever pause to understand what those 3 simple nutrients actually do. Once you understand that, the power of wood ash becomes almost impossible to ignore. The real magic of this gray mineral is not just what is in it, it is what those nutrients tell your plants to become. Nitrogen, the N, is the fuel for leaves and stems. It pushes plants upward and outward, building the architecture of greenery. Phosphorus, the P, supports roots' early development in the quiet internal chemistry that keeps seedlings strong. And then there is potassium, the K, the master conductor. It is the nutrient that decides whether your plant will stay leafy and lush or shift its energy into flowers, fruit, sweetness, color, and resilience. Potassium is the turning point where effort becomes harvest. When a tomato or pepper plant begins to bloom, it faces a silent choice. It can continue pouring its energy into leaves, creating thick foliage and tall, impressive plants, or it can redirect that energy into the next phase, flowers and fruit. Potassium is the nutrient that gives the signal. It acts like a traffic officer inside the plant, directing sugars from the leaves into developing fruit and telling the plant when it is time to shift gears. It even manages the tiny pores on the leaf surface, the stomata, which open and close to regulate water use. With enough potassium, plants handle drought better, resist heat stress, and maintain the steady flow of nutrients they need to produce firm, flavorful fruit. It strengthens plant tissues from the inside out, making the entire plant more resistant to disease. But when potassium is low, the plant doesn't warn you right away. In fact, it can fool you. It will stand tall, lush, and green. The leaves will look plentiful, but behind that beauty is a bottleneck. Few flowers, blossoms dropping before they set fruit, and fruit that stays small, pale, and poorly shaped. Many gardeners blame the weather, the variety, or pests, when the real culprit is simply a lack of potassium. Across large portions of the United States, especially the Southeast, the Northeast, the Pacific Northwest, and any region with sandy or heavily rained-on soils, potassium doesn't stay put. It leaches away. This is precisely where wood ash becomes such a powerful ally. It releases potassium slowly, steadily, and naturally, especially in soils that lean acidic. Then there is the calcium story, one that nearly every tomato grower has felt in their heart. If you have ever walked up to your best-looking tomato only to find the bottom sinking into a black, leathery patch, you have met blossom end rot. It is heartbreaking. It feels like a disease, but it isn't one. It is not a fungus or an infection. It is a calcium transport problem. During the earliest days of fruit formation, cells inside the tomato multiply rapidly. They need a stable supply of calcium to build strong walls. If the soil lacks available calcium, or if watering is inconsistent, or if salts build up in the root zone, the plant simply cannot move enough calcium into the developing fruit in time, and the fruit collapses at the blossom end. Wood ash steps into this problem with surprising effectiveness. The calcium inside ash dissolves quickly and becomes available to the plant within weeks, far faster than crushed eggshells, which can take years to break down. Gardeners who once lost half their tomato crop to blossom end rot often see dramatic improvement when they add moderate amounts of wood ash to soil that tests low in calcium. University trials and extension programs have confirmed this again and again. When the soil is deficient, ash can significantly reduce blossom end rot and strengthen early fruit development. Used with care, ash becomes more than an amendment. It becomes a quiet partner in shifting your garden from leaves to fruit. It supports the chemistry that builds sweetness, firmness, and color, and it does all of it with minerals that trees pulled from the ground decades ago. Minerals now return to the soil in a form your plants can understand and use. Now that we have talked about nutrients and plant physiology, let's step out of the textbooks and walk into a real backyard. Nothing is more convincing than what actually happens in the soil under our feet. In one carefully documented home garden experiment, two raised beds sat side by side, built from the same lumber, filled with the same compost and bathed in the same sunlight. The gardener planted the same tomato variety in both beds on the very same day, watered them on the same schedule, and kept meticulous notes. There was only one difference between the two beds, and it was almost laughably small. In bed A, the gardener added nothing unusual. In bed B, every plant received just 1 tablespoon of sifted hardwood ash, scratched gently into the soil every 2 weeks during the fruiting season. That was it. No fancy fertilizer, no complicated mixture, just wood ash applied in tiny doses with quiet consistency. From the first ripe fruit of summer until the final frost of fall, the gardener harvested every tomato, weighed every basket, and logged every detail. At the end of the season, when the numbers were added up, the results were astonishing. The untreated bed produced around 5.5 pounds of tomatoes per plant, but the ash-treated bed delivered over 22 pounds per plant. Not a small improvement, not a modest gain, 4 times the harvest. The gardener, stunned by the results, shared the records with extension staff from a local university. They reviewed the notes, compared the weather patterns, confirmed the soil conditions, and verified the plant variety. Everything was the same except for the gentle addition of wood ash. With that confirmation, the simple truth became hard to ignore. When the soil is deficient in potassium and calcium, ash can transform production. Even the visual differences were striking. Plants in the ash-amended bed stood shorter and sturdier, their stems thick and strong, built like little tree trunks rather than delicate vines. Fruit clusters were so heavy that some trusses bent under the weight, pulling vines into graceful arcs. The leaves remained deep, vibrant green far later into the season, a sign of balanced nutrition and lower stress. Perhaps most comforting of all for tomato growers, blossom end rot was almost entirely absent in the ash-treated bed, while it showed up regularly in the untreated one. This isn't a lone gardener's lucky year. Trials in Georgia have shown yield increases of 45% or more in potassium-poor soils when ash is applied properly. Forestry and agricultural studies across Finland and Scandinavia have documented healthier growth, better structure, and improved nutrient uptake in acidic soils treated with wood ash. But there is one important nuance here. If your soil already holds plenty of potassium and calcium, you might not see dramatic changes. Plants can only take up what they lack. That is exactly why soil testing is such an essential step. It turns guesswork into clarity and helps you understand whether your garden is quietly starving for minerals you have unknowingly been throwing away. For many older American homes, properties that have been gardened for decades without balanced mineral amendments, potassium and calcium deficiencies are surprisingly common. When paired with the right soil conditions, wood ash doesn't just help. It unlocks potential your plants have been waiting to express for years. Now we arrive at the part that matters most for your garden. The how, not just the why. Wood ash, wonderful as it is, behaves a little like strong medicine. In the right dose, it builds strength and vitality. But if we apply it carelessly, it can overwhelm the system. Used with intention and a gentle hand, wood ash becomes one of the finest free fertilizers a home gardener will ever find. The very first rule is simple. Only use clean wood ash. What you want is ash from natural, untreated wood, oak, maple, hickory, fruitwood, or even clean-burning softwoods like pine or fir. These ashes contain the minerals the tree pulled from the soil during its lifetime, and nothing more. But ashes from charcoal briquettes, pressure-treated lumber, painted boards, plywood, particle board, or anything burned with inks or plastics are unsafe. They contain binders, resins, metals, solvents, and chemicals that have no place in a vegetable garden. Coal ash, despite its name, is an entirely different substance and should never be used around plants. Once you have clean ash, the next question is which plants actually want it. Wood ash naturally raises soil pH, nudging acidic soil toward neutral. Tomatoes love that. Peppers, eggplants, squash, cucumbers, melons, beans, peas, cabbages, broccoli, and kale all respond positively when the soil becomes just a little less acidic. Many fruit trees, especially apples, appreciate the extra potassium and calcium as well, and berry bushes like currants often thrive. But there are plants that recoil from ash just as strongly. Blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, camellias, hollies, and heathers all depend on acidic soil. Even a sprinkle of ash can push their pH too high and cause decline. Potatoes, too, deserve a special warning. While potatoes tolerate some acidity, they are extremely vulnerable to a condition called potato scab, which thrives in alkaline soils. Ash can make that problem far worse. So if you cherish your blueberry patch or grow a lot of potatoes, keep the ash in those beds far apart. Because ash is so fine, so reactive, and so mineral dense, less truly is more. Most university extension services suggest no more than 5 to 10 pounds of ash per 100 square feet of garden per year. For individual plants, a tablespoon or two is often enough, repeated every 2 to 4 weeks during fruiting. Those amounts may seem tiny, but remember just how concentrated wood ash really is. The goal is gentle correction, not flooding the soil with minerals. There are several thoughtful ways to apply ash. One of the safest approaches is the pre-season application. Before planting, usually in late winter or early spring, sprinkle ash evenly across the bed. A pound or two per 100 square feet is plenty. Work it into the top few inches of soil, water it in, and give the bed a couple of weeks to mellow. This allows the minerals to dissolve gradually and the soil biology to adjust. If your plants are already in the ground, side dressing is another option. Sift the ash so you are working with fine powder, then measure 1 or 2 tablespoons per plant. Sprinkle it around the drip line, not directly against the stem, scratch it gently into the soil surface, and water deeply. Repeat every couple of weeks during heavy fruiting, watching your plants closely. If you notice yellowing leaves with dark green veins or a white crust forming on the soil surface, pause and consider a pH test. Plants often speak before the soil does. For gardeners who prefer a softer touch, ash tea is a wonderful alternative. Place a cup of clean, sifted ash into a 5-gallon bucket. Add water, stir, and let it settle for a day. Pour off the clear liquid, Dilute it half and half with fresh water and apply it like a liquid fertilizer. A cup or two around each established plant every 2 or 3 weeks works wonders. Because the minerals are diluted, the risk of burning roots is minimal, and the lack of dust makes this method friendly for anyone with respiratory concerns. Finally, there is the compost pile, the gentlest and most forgiving way to use ash. As you build your compost, sprinkle thin layers of ash over every few inches of kitchen, scraps, leaves, and grass clippings. Keep it to about 5 to 10% of the total volume. As the pile transforms, the ash helps neutralize acids, feeds the microbes that do the real work, and enriches the finished compost with potassium, calcium, and trace minerals. When that compost is added to your garden beds, the minerals are buffered and released slowly without spiking soil pH. Each of these methods respects both the power and the delicacy of wood ash, turning what so many people throw away into one of the most reliable mineral tools a gardener can have. As powerful and beneficial as wood ash can be, it carries a truth familiar to every experienced gardener. Even the best amendment becomes troublesome when we use too much of it. Nature is remarkably forgiving, but soil chemistry has its limits. When ash begins tipping the balance, the garden will whisper its warnings long before things truly go wrong, if we know how to listen. One of the earliest signs is a pale, chalky crust forming on the surface of the soil after watering or rain. This thin layer isn't dangerous by itself, but it tells you the soil is receiving more minerals than it can comfortably absorb. It is the garden's first quiet signal that the balance is starting to shift. Soon after, the leaves may begin sending messages of their own. They might lose their deep, vibrant green and turn pale while the veins stay dark. This condition, known as iron chlorosis, is often triggered by soil pH rising too high. It doesn't mean the plant lacks iron. It means the soil has become too alkaline for the plant to unlock the nutrients already there. Then there are the plants that wilt even when the soil is clearly moist. This confusing symptom can come from excess salts in the root zone. When too much ash accumulates, those salts interfere with water uptake, and the plant responds as though it were thirsty even while sitting in damp soil. Seedlings can be even more sensitive. In areas where heavy amounts of ash have been applied, seeds may struggle to germinate or fail entirely. Young roots simply cannot tolerate the abrupt spike in pH and mineral concentration. If any of these warnings appear, the solution is not complicated, but it must be gentle and timely. The first step is to stop all ash applications immediately, then test your soil pH. If it measures above 7.5, you are no longer dealing with nutrition alone. You are dealing with an imbalance in acidity. From here, your goal is to bring the soil back toward equilibrium. Deep watering helps leach excess salts downward, away from delicate roots. Adding compost introduces organic matter that buffers high pH and restores microbial balance. In severe cases, your local extension service may recommend elemental sulfur applied carefully to nudge the soil back into a healthier range. The most important thing to remember is that gardening favors patience over perfection. It is always easier to add a little more ash next year than it is to undo too much this year. Wood ash is a teacher in that way, encouraging us to work with moderation, mindfulness, and a respect for the quiet chemistry beneath our feet. Up to this point, we have talked about history, plant science, and gardening practice. But wood ash sits in a much larger story, one that touches the realities many people face every single day. Beyond the chemistry, this little gray mineral intersects with three things that deeply matter: the cost of living, the legacy we leave on this earth, and the comfort of knowing we can still provide for ourselves. Let's begin with the issue hitting home for so many families right now: money. Fertilizer prices have soared in recent years, rising and falling like a roller coaster no one asked to ride. Global events, geopolitical tension, energy shortages, and trade disruptions have all pushed prices upward. Reports from the World Bank and agricultural analysts show that global fertilizer prices jumped roughly 21% in 2025 alone. Potash, in particular, climbed sharply and is yet to return to the calm, predictable levels we once took for granted. A 50-pound bag of potassium fertilizer that used to cost $20 now costs $40, $50, or even $60 in some regions. For those living on fixed incomes, those numbers matter. Every dollar spent on fertilizer is a dollar not available for groceries, medications, or simple comforts. Yet at the same time, many households heat their homes with wood. Each cord of hardwood produces 25 to 80 pounds of ash. A household that burns 3 or 4 cords a winter can easily generate 75 to 300 pounds of ash, an amount that can feed a large home garden for an entire year at effectively zero cost. Then there is the environmental side. Modern potash doesn't come from a small factory down the road. It comes from the crust of the earth itself. It begins with ore blasted from deep underground mines in places like Saskatchewan, ore that must then be crushed, floated, refined, dried, and packaged in energy-intensive processing plants. From there, it travels hundreds of miles by rail, sometimes crossing oceans by cargo ship, before being trucked inland to distributors and eventually to the store where you buy it. Studies estimate that producing and transporting just 1 ton of potassium fertilizer can release around 1 ton of carbon dioxide. Compare that to using ash from your own stove. No mining, no shipping, no factories or cargo trains or diesel trucks, just a gentle walk from the fireplace to the garden. At the national scale, the Environmental Protection Agency estimates that 1 to 2 million tons of wood ash are landfilled each year in the United States. At the same time, we import millions of tons of potash from abroad. From a common sense standpoint, that's completely upside down. We bury the resource sitting right in front of us and then pay a premium to ship in the same mineral from halfway around the world. Finally, wood ash touches on self-reliance and security. Many of you remember rationing, economic shocks, or grocery shelves that emptied without warning. Today's supply chains feel longer, thinner, and more fragile than ever. A port slowdown, a rail strike, or political tensions involving major potash exporters can interrupt the entire system. Sudden price spikes force gardeners to make hard choices. But when you build fertility with materials from your own home, compost, leaves, kitchen scraps, and wood ash, you are no longer vulnerable to those disruptions. You don't control global markets, but you do control what happens in your fireplace and in your backyard. That sense of independence and resourcefulness, of knowing you can continue to nourish your soil even when the world feels uncertain, is something to value deeply. Wood ash becomes more than a fertilizer. It becomes a quiet expression of resilience, thrift, and the wisdom of making good use of what you already have. The garden isn't only about plants or perfect technique. It is about people and how we continue to grow, stay strong, and stay connected to the world around us. The story of wood ash isn't just a story about soil, it's a story about purpose, dignity, and joy. Modern research confirms that tending a garden is one of the most healing activities a person can do. It keeps the body active in a gentle, natural way, helping lower blood pressure, supporting heart health, and improving balance and mobility. Gardeners often report less loneliness, reduced depression, and a deeper sense of meaning in their daily routines. Backyard beds have been linked with better sleep, steadier appetite, and richer emotional well-being. A 2020 review of studies found that when gardening combines light physical movement, mental focus, and small moments of social interaction, it produces measurable improvements in both physical and mental health. That combination of purpose, pride, and connection is exactly what makes a garden such a powerful companion. This is where wood ash fits naturally into the rhythm of gardening. Instead of hauling heavy bags from a store, you are working with light containers already in your home. Instead of spending money, you are using something you would otherwise throw away. Instead of relying on long, fragile supply chains, you are participating in a quiet, local loop of nourishment: heat from the stove, ashes from the fire, minerals back to the soil, and food on the table. Every part of the cycle stays close to home. Of course, our bodies change as we grow older. Knees stiffen, and lifting or bending may not feel as effortless as it once did. But gardening adapts beautifully. Wood ash can be stored in small 1-gallon buckets instead of large tubs, making it easy to carry. You can sit on a sturdy garden stool while you side dress tomatoes or peppers. You can mix ash tea so that application becomes as simple as pouring from a watering can. Raised beds lift the soil closer to you, reducing strain. If younger hands are nearby, children, grandchildren, or neighbors, let them carry the heavier bucket while you guide the placement. That sharing of work builds connection just as surely as compost builds soil. For those with respiratory concerns, it helps to work with ash on calm days rather than windy ones. Lightly misting the ash before scooping keeps dust from rising. Wearing a simple dust mask provides even more protection. Because ash is alkaline, wearing gloves and washing hands afterward keeps your skin safe. These small adjustments honor both your body and your garden. They make the practice sustainable, not just for your soil, but for your long-term health, comfort, and independence. With each season, the simple act of using wood ash becomes more than a gardening technique. It becomes a reminder that resilience doesn't disappear with age. It deepens, it adapts, and it continues to nourish in the garden and far beyond it.